Welcome to this Canadian Cancer Society webcast, Returning to Work After Cancer. This webcast is generously supported by RBC. My name is Nicole De Silva. I'm a peer support specialist and the moderator of CancerConnection.ca, and I'll be your host. In today's webcast, we will be having a discussion with Maureen Parkinson, who is a vocational rehabilitation counselor at the BC Cancer Agency. Maureen created the Cancer and Returning to Work, a practical guide for cancer patients, and has facilitated return to work and job search seminars for cancer survivors. We will also be speaking with Dr. Christine Mailloux, who is an associate professor in the Ingram School of Nursing at McGill University. She also holds a clinical scientist position with the Cancer Survivorship Program at the Princess Margaret Cancer Centre in Toronto. Maureen and Christine are currently co-leading the development of the Cancer and Work website to provide education to cancer survivors, healthcare providers, and employers on return to work. Welcome, Maureen and Christine. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks
for inviting us.
In today's webcast, we will be discussing and learning more about the timing for return to work and how you can prepare for this transition, some ideas on disclosure about your cancer experience, and what you can do to increase the chance of successfully returning to work or school. Before I get started, I do have a few housekeeping items for our audience. Throughout the presentation, we will be pausing to accept your questions. Please submit your questions at any time using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. They will be sent to me, and I will aspire to get you answers from Maureen and Christine. From time to time, we will be referencing some useful resources or links and websites that inform our discussion. You can find all of these resources at the resource widget, also at the bottom of your screen, and you'll be able to get full access to these resources. And if you have any issues with the technology, click on the Help widget, which is the question mark at the bottom of your screen. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get started. To begin, I'd like to ask all of our viewers a poll question. Are you currently experiencing or considering returning to work after cancer? So as you'll see, the answers that we have posted are yes, I am, no, I am not, or I'm a friend or family member of someone who is. So again, the question, are you currently experiencing or considering returning to work after cancer? To answer a poll, just click on the answer that best suits you and then hit submit. This will help give us a sense of who's all on the webcast today. So let's take a look and see a better idea of who we all have today. So it looks like 75% of everyone on the webcast today is currently experiencing or considering returning to work after cancer. About 19% are not currently experiencing it. And just over 6% are a friend or family member of someone who is. So it looks like we have a really wide variety of people on the webcast today. So I hope that everyone will be able to learn something and also be able to benefit from Maureen and Christine. So now that we have an idea of who is all on the webcast today, I'm wondering, Maureen and Christine, if you'd like to get us started by letting us know a little bit about the website that you're currently working on.
Sure. Thank you, Nicole. So this is Christine. So this is a wonderful website that Maureen and I are leading with a wonderful group of individuals to develop a website that will address the needs for information and also for tools to help assess cancer survivors' readiness to return to work, among other areas. And this website, which is coming soon, we're hoping to launch in the end of March, we'll be providing resources not just for the individuals who've had cancer, but also for the healthcare providers to also give them the support and resources to assess their patients' readiness to work, but also other tools that some of them will be discussing today. And we will also be providing resources for the employers, insurance providers, and union representatives. So again, helpful resources for them to be to better inform of what it's like to have cancer, but also what they can do to have a success return to work for the cancer survivors. And this website has been possible by some funds that we've received from the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer. And some of our partners for this website is the D'Souza Institute, the Canadian Cancer Society, the Canadian Cancer Survivorships Network, and the National Institute of Disability and Management and Research. And then some of the other organizations that you see below the pictures. So we're really hoping that we have pulled some of the best in the world in Canada so that we can provide you with up-to-date resources and knowledge and education to help successful return to work for cancer survivors.
So in the meantime today, we're probably going to be relaying a lot of information. It's Maureen speaking, and thank you for inviting me. So in the meantime, here's a resource that you can click into, either on the website or even just Googling Cancer Returning to Work to Practical Guide for Cancer Patients. We're putting this into the website as well as expanding it and providing a lot more information. But again, if the information is there's too much out there and things like that, this is a reference for you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what can our viewers do to help determine when they are actually ready to return to work?
So timing is a big issue because in many cases in working with cancer survivors, I see sort of two groups. I see one group where they're racing back to work. They may not anticipate the problems and challenges they have, only to find that when they're back, they may be struggling or it might be unsuccessful. And that can be both hard on the self-esteem and also difficult for the employer. And then I may see another group where they're kind of expecting themselves to be back 100%, where, it's not unusual to go back less than 100%. And time ticks by, and with that, there's a greater likelihood of losing attachment to the workplace, which can be things like your relationships with your work colleagues, but it also can be things like losing things that you like in your job, becoming more rusty at the job and out of date. So timing is a critical factor in terms of paying attention to where you are on that.
Also, what you may want to think about is developing your own rehab plan, and that part of determining the return to work and improving your chances of returning to work may involve some of these four aspects that's listed on the presentation on this slide, which means assessing and improving your ability to work. And again, we'll talk about some of the tools that we'll have on our website that can be used in order to provide you with a job analysis so that you can self-assess. You also want to assess the job demands and see how to match this against what you feel you still can do, and find problem-solving ways to overcome some of those challenges that you feel may prevent you from returning to work. And if possible, finding what are the specific challenges that you're facing, such as fatigue, fear of stress, problems with sleep, or if you're needing some assessment for your physical, neurological, or psychological functioning. And perhaps also this is time for you to communicate those barriers that you have identified with your healthcare providers, so that they can also allow them to identify specific resources or helpful services to address with your challenges that you have identified. And some of these helpful services could be things like seeking out for counselors, could be for survivorship issues, looking into an anxiety management. You may want to also look into cognitive skill training. Again, this could be to assess your memory functioning, but also to gain back some of those memory functioning. Learning some stress management, such as meditation, relaxation exercise. And that also could mean taking some part of cognitive behavioral training, especially if you're having some anxiety and fears about returning to work. And if you're having some difficulty about sleep, so you can want to think about looking into a sleep clinic, or to gain some information about sleep management, looking into fatigue clinic also, that could be helpful.
And I've noticed you're not necessarily looking at all those. You're looking at the specific barriers that you may have and talking to your physician or resourcing helpful sort of resources for yourself that could help you with those challenges.
Okay, thank you. So is there a way then for our viewers to self-assess their ability to return to work?
Yes, there is, and we're showing you this other slide here. And then before Christine talks about self-assessment, I want to talk about a few other assessments that are also available to consider if self-assessment isn't sufficient in itself. So absolute self-assessment is critical because these are the things that you're going to be relaying to your physician in order for them to tweak your medical management, but also to fill out forms in terms of continuing claim if that's what you need, or fit to return, or accommodations you might need. But other types of assessments, if self-assessment is not sufficient, it may come through the allied healthcare teams, things like sort of physiotherapy, kinesiology, and occupational therapy assessments to look at your physical ability to do certain jobs. Neuropsychology and neurooccupational therapy can be very helpful in terms of looking at your thinking ability and attention ability. And psychiatry or psychology assessments can be really helpful in terms of determining your if there's any psychological challenges and what could be done. And in some cases, even on-the-job assessments can be really helpful if it's absolutely difficult to anticipate how you're going to do. So on-site occupational therapists might be able to help you kind of look at your job, watch you in your job, see how things can be done more efficiently, and problem solve with you and your employer around that. And even a graduated return to work in some ways, and that's one of the most common ways that people, a common accommodation, is a way of kind of gently sort of self-assessing your abilities.
So when you're looking at things, so what can I do to self-assess? So self-assess means that you're assessing yourself for your work, what you think could be in terms for your work abilities. So the first and easiest way that you can do to self-assess is to track your day in a systematic way. So just like you're trying to see when you're getting up in the morning and you assess how long it takes you before you get tired. So again, we will have some online resources on our website that will test out your energizer and drainer tools that will help you to assess when is it that during the day you have the most energy and when is it throughout the day that actually you start feeling kind of drained. You may also try out some work simulation, but again, it's only if your doctor has cleared you as being as safe to do trying out some work simulation. And these work simulation might be something similar activities that you would do at your job, but you will do at home to try them out again. So this could mean if you're a cook, you may want to try to assess how long can you cook and stand up before you start actually getting tired. So how long can you endure and how long do you last? You may also want to try out some different activities. We may suggest like volunteer work, but again, of note, some insurance companies may view volunteer work as work. So again, you would need to verify that. But then other activities could be try out some enjoyable things and see again how long you last and where is it that you have those energies, but where is it then you start being drained. Again, while these are the ways of assessing, you want to look at what is it that you still can do well and what is it that challenges you, such as perhaps lifting weights above your head, or is it when you're walking for more than an hour, or you don't have any difficulties. So these are certain aspects that you can do.
So the other part of assessment is assessing your work site, which is really kind of getting a good sense of your job demands. And I always think an example of, say, if you're working as a waitress or waiter or food service person, a job in one restaurant might vary to another job. In one restaurant, you might be expected to clean up and put food away or things like. Another one, you might have somebody like a bus person who's helping you clear the tables, not physically demanding. So the more you can really analyze your job, the more you can inform your physician or your healthcare provider of those, so they can give some informed medical information. And related to that, in the BC Cancer Agency Return to Work booklet, there is a format for job analysis for you to look at that and share. And we're quite excited in terms of Cancer and Work. We're going to have quite a fancy online one where you'll punch in your numbers and it'll even spit out a summary that you can show people in your healthcare team. So the other thing to also assess for yourself is support at the workplace. So it'll be things like, how supportive is the workplace in the past? How have they shown, related to that can be how have they shown how to accommodate others in the past, other people with illnesses and disabilities. These are really helpful for yourself in terms of feeling comfortable, and also to provide information for your physician, for example, in order to maybe provide guidance to your employer about what you might need in order to kind of encourage them by the law to accommodate you.
Okay. Now, since a lot of people are still involved with their healthcare teams when they may be considering a return to work, what sorts of things should be discussed with a doctor or healthcare team member?
So as mentioned, often the doctor's opinion will be relayed to guide the employers in terms of making accommodation and also to complete the insurance form. And this is time where they'll also be assessing your fitness to return to work. So it's really important that you inform your doctor about what's really going on with you in terms of if you're having some challenges or emotional challenges or physical challenges. So that your doctor really needs to be aware of those so that he can properly assess you and also properly treat you, but also refer you to the professionals who could help you. So if you're dealing with such issues, not everybody has some, but some people may have some fatigue or brain fog. So if your doctor's aware of those, then he can also make the assessment, but also properly refer you to who can help you manage and then manage these symptoms. So you want to make sure that you discuss your situation as well with anybody who you think will be asked to complete any kind of forms to assess your ability to return to work. You may also need to talk about your workplace culture with your doctor and share how you feel that perhaps at your work environment you will get the support you need, or you may not feel that you will get that support. So it may be that you will need more time off work if you expect that be less support.
Or your doctor is actually going to guide your employer to how to support you.
Yes. And then also discussing in terms of your timeline to recovery. So again, when does your doctor has to be aware in terms of you have to be aware, but your doctor has to be aware and assess in terms of what he or when she thinks you'll be at full capacity to return to work. So you need to know if you're going to recover fully and without any help, or if you'll need a referral again to some of these specialists. So in most cases, people do return to their jobs, but some have to wait a bit longer or they don't return. So hence, the sooner you can look at this, the better it is. In terms of time frame, if you're not feeling that you're recovering according to your time frame, then again, this is time for you to communicate this with your doctor. And then perhaps your doctor can also provide you with suggestion in terms of what self-assessment can be done and how he can self-assess and how he can refer you to resources that are out there. So this could be discussing in terms of resources in your hospital or a community-based program, or even one that your insurance provider can offer if it's not offered within the healthcare system.
Okay, so how then can our viewers set themselves up for success when they are returning to work?
So as Christine sort of mentioned, it's really important to start planning and having these discussions earlier, because the sooner you can do that, the less likely you're going to have some unpleasant surprises down the road. I think, for example, insurance policies might have changes in definitions if you're on long-term disability, and so you want to anticipate that. The other thing is, as mentioned, you want to, in a systematic way, manage your abilities and discuss your challenges, because challenges can be opportunities to kind of address them. The other one is to keep your healthcare providers, discuss this with them early and often. You want them to be informed because, as mentioned, they're guiding further services, but they're also guiding insurance companies or your employers. So you want them in the loop, and you want to consider any physician that's going to be asked to fill out forms. And again, access resources that can help you now. Like I think about even with people that are in treatment, if they're identifying that stress is a concern for them, are there resources that exist within their healthcare system, or even reading books and online programs can be helpful. And another big one is really maintaining and fostering workplace support. What I'm seeing in I'm hearing from the people that I work with, as well as it's really coming out in the research, is that the success of returning to work is very much influenced on how much support you get from the workplace. So maintaining your, as we say, attachments to the workplace is critical in terms of your success. So the other thing to consider is you will be tired. I used to teach employment programs to people that weren't going through cancer. They were just unemployed for a period of time, and they were exhausted when they were attending these sessions. So it will not be unreasonable for you to be tired. So the more you can do to kind of orient yourself before the start date, I would say things like some people find it difficult to say hellos and, talking about their cancer and issue with their colleagues. So these are the things that you might want to consider doing before you go back to work, so it's not emotionally draining for you. The other things to consider is to reduce non-work demands on yourself during the first weeks and months, and that could involve, everything from, doing your housekeeping so you don't have to do it as much, cooking meals ahead of time so you can just quickly make them. It also can be things like renegotiating with your family members and saying, now I'm going back to work, I need you to help out. And also learning things like learning how to prioritize, and that part of that is learning time management techniques. This also can be a conversation with your employer about, what, especially if you're in a graduated return to work, asking about what are the bottom line things that I need to do, or what are the things that aren't priority. So it sort of saves the stress on you.
And what sorts of things should people consider around disclosure about their cancer diagnosis at their workplace?
So I think, disclosure workplace is very much contingent on you. It's very much influenced on how comfortable you are with this and, again, how supportive your workplace. So I think you want to think about the pros and cons of telling others. Do you have a supported workplace? How has it happened to be? How successful has it been for the past? Who needs to know? Your employer may need to know some degree of information, but do they need to know the nitty-gritty? Maybe your inner circle of colleagues might need to know that you need accommodations, for example, some help from them, but do they need to know everything about that? This is a very personal thing that you have to figure out. So the other thing is I certainly come across a lot of people that are very fearful about disclosure and worried. And I think, the more you can kind of go back to your work environment and sort of sort out what is fear and what's being fact. Like how have other people been treated when they've disclosed illnesses or disability? How have they been treated by colleagues? Mm-hmm. If you can do that. And that can even be going to a counselor and saying, I need to kind of separate, what am I concerned about versus what I've really noticed at the workplace. Also, you can be asking, asking union, their experience with that. Also, you could be talking to human resources and expressing your concerns. So again, as mentioned, you want to decide who you're going to tell, how much, when, and how. And these are the things you might want to think about and talk through earlier out. And as mentioned, you can seek help from things like your union, colleagues that have helped cope with illness and disability in the past. HR certainly knows how to guide the employer in terms of how to follow the law, things like that.
Okay.
Also, as mentioned, there's things like, actually forgot, continuing on terms of the answer, there's also, if you have vocational rehab support through insurance provider, those are disability managers, OC Health, those are other potential people to sort of consult with.
Okay, perfect. So since some people may still be coping with side effects or changes to their abilities as a result of cancer, they may need modifications at their workplace. What sorts of things are you able to tell us about job accommodations?
So about job accommodation in terms of with the side effects or their change to their abilities, again, we will have some of that information on our website that will relate in terms of you're experiencing this X amount of side effects from your treatment, what is the possible accommodation you can have? But what job accommodation is looking for a change to your work environment or a set of job tasks that enables a person with impairment to participate still in work activities in a safe and a productive way. So some of the job accommodation that we've had listed is transitional work process, which means perhaps thinking about a graduated return to work. You may also want to look at job modification, and again, this would mean perhaps replacing some tasks or changing some. Or you may want to look at job redesigning, which we mean changing the way the tasks are organized, such as in ways if you've identified that you have you're more concentrated, more productive in the morning, you may want to keep those tasks that require more energy from you, such as writing, and keeping the less demanding jobs perhaps for afterwards. You may want to think about ergonomic changes, such as workstation adjustments. This can mean for people who are experiencing perhaps lymphedema. You could add an armrest, or you could add ergonomic keyboard. You may also want to think about assistive devices. So this can include voice-activated software. You may also want to think about modified work locations and scheduling. So work modification could be like telecommunicating, working from home, or working remotely. You may also want to look about how can you remove barriers from work, reassigning to a vacant position if this is what your accommodation calls for, and then looking as well for providing assistance such as getting extra supervision if needed.
Okay. And
So I just wanted to actually add to that. These are examples of job accommodation, and of course you have to take into account with the jobs and the work environment. Like not all these are going to work for the person or the challenge or the work environment. So it's very much a negotiated process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what is a person's rights then in regards to returning to work?
Okay. So first of all, the employer has a duty to accommodate those with a disability unless they can prove undue hardship. And yes, cancer is considered a disability protected under human rights. So just a definition of disability, it's for the purpose of a work accommodation. It can be from a consequence of disease, injury, or condition that impairs one's ability to perform their normal functioning. It includes those who have or have perceived to have a mental or physical disability, whether visible or non-visible, permanent or temporary. So as mentioned, the employer has a duty to accommodate those with a disability unless and prove undue hardship. So they're expected to implement the necessary measures that will allow an employee with limitation due to illness or disability to work to their best of their ability. And if you're wanting to know what undue hardship it is, essentially, the bar for it is undue hardship is the cost to the employer providing the accommodation would be so high it would threaten the organization's survival. It's also taking into consideration the health and safety risks at the work, the size and the flexibility of the workplace, and also, how disruptive it is to the collective agreement, the morale of other employees, and the interchangeability of workforce and facilities. So, continuing on. So it is really important to know that, I don't know if she's asking this question. Oh, okay. You're going to ask questions.
Yes. So who is responsible then for figuring out those workplace accommodations? The employee or is it the employer?
So it's everyone. I was sort of jumping the gun here, but it very much is everyone. The employee has a duty to accept a reasonable accommodation, even if it's not the preferred solution. So this is a quote from the BC Human Rights Coalition. Reasonable accommodation means something less than the perfect solution. Be prepared to consider retraining or relocating in order to take on a different job-related duties. So further to that, the employer's responsibility is to design workplace requirements and standards that do not discriminate against those with disability, soliciting information concerning the employee's disability-related employment needs, accommodating individuals to the point of undue hardship, with the first priority being modification to the duties and practices related to their current job, showing that attempts to accommodate were serious, conscientious, and genuine, and demonstrate best efforts, and ensuring that discrimination and harassment based on disability is not permitted as part on either the employer or co-workers. So what is the responsibility for you as an employee? It is to provide information regarding the nature of your disability, so providing and supplying job-relevant medical information. So it doesn't have necessarily diagnostic. It's not that your employer needs to know the prognosis of your cancer, but it's more it may be helpful for them to know when you're expected to return to work, as well as things like your functional limitations and your residual capacity. And it's important you say if you need some help or change in your environment, you need for accommodation, and to be cooperative with this, to be cooperative in assisting in identifying and implementing appropriate accommodation, and actually to comply with your treatment plan. So if they're offering you rehabilitation to improve your abilities, it is to comply with that as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, a topic that has been discussed on our online community is job searching when a patient or survivor is considering returning to work. What are things to consider about disclosing a cancer diagnosis when searching for work or during a job interview?
So I think one of the first and most important thing is to really, again, back to really getting a good sense of your abilities and measuring it against the job demands. So you really want to assess, and ideally you're applying for a job that you can do. So, sometimes people, one really great way to do it, it's also inadvertently a great job search technique, is to use informational interviews, which is to go and talk to people and say, tell me a bit about the job without even applying. The advantage of that is, and one great question there is to say, tell me about a typical day. So you haven't said anything about yourself, but meanwhile you're getting to find out about the daily job demands. At that point, then you decide if you need to disclose. So the disclosure could be really not so much about necessarily having cancer. It could be more about you need to disclose, you need something to allow you to do your job. And then you need to decide what and how you're going to disclose. And again, you talk to some people, they would say, the other part of this is also timing. Some may feel that you need to necessarily disclose early on. The downside of that could be that there could be that might sort of scare off an employer. So this link we have here by worklink.com gives some great ideas in terms of the timing. But ultimately, in many cases, it's not the cancer you need to necessarily disclose. It's the thing you need accommodation for. So it'll be the disability. So if you're having some problems with thinking, you might be sort of disclosing more in terms of, I would encourage you when you disclose is you frame it positively. Like I often say, pair it with a positive statement or sandwich it. So it can be like, I find that I have some challenges with occasionally I have difficulty remembering, and I find when I have a task system sent to me, it maximizes my productivity, and I'm found that I'm able to work at the maximum productive level. And the advantage of doing that is you're kind of speaking to what the employer wants to hear. They want to hear that you're able to do the job with this minor accommodation, but as well, you're thinking about their needs as well as yours.
And there's also certain ways that you can address the gaps in your time frame or in your CV if you don't want to disclose. So there are such things as saying that you took time off for yourself, for personal reasons, for family, that you needed time to resolve for your health issues. So that could be.
So again, these are very personal decisions that you have to come up with. You have to come up with something that feels comfortable with, and I think it's one of those things that you want to practice with. You need to be comfortable with it, and so this requires practice on your part. So you practice it so that it becomes a non-issue. Because one of the things I find is if you're feeling anxious about it, they'll pick up on it. So you want to figure this out and role play it with a trusted friend, role play it with somebody who's in management, and ask their feedback about how that sounds. You want to take into account the workplace you work at, what's going to fly in the workplace. So this is really working this through ahead of time. So by the time you get to the interview, you're comfortable. And I think ultimately, part of disclosure is you've got to remember that one of the big things when you talk about gap of work history is you've probably had a fairly extensive working life, or many people have. You have a lot to offer the employer. You need to remind yourself what you have to offer your employer, because that's where you want to redirect. Often any sort of concerns, because if you don't come from a place of feeling you're deficient, come from a place of reminding yourself all the wonderful things you have to offer your employer. And the other thing, and I'm getting into job search, and we're going to spend a lot more time on the website talking about this, is one of the biggest things you can do is really work on your job search techniques. Because I'm always amazed when people say, I know how to do a resume, or I know how to do a job interview. There are many programs that are available in the community that can make you very qualified looking for work. And, that's a way to compensate if you're feeling a little self-conscious about this. So it's really a comfortable process for you. So then you'll find how you present yourself will overcome any concerns that you have.
There's also resources in your community that you can find to help you to some job search and also getting you ready for job interviews. There's some workshops that can be provided that are 1-day, 2-day workshops that first they'll help you to build your CV, but also how to effectively conduct a job interview.
Yeah. So those are the types of things we'll be writing on the website, is community resources that will be available to you to help you with that. Resources that will specifically help people that are coping with a history of illness and disability, but also just sort of generic job search resources for you. Okay. Nicole?
Okay, so now we do have a little bit of time remaining, and I would like to certainly get to a lot of the questions that have been coming in. So if you haven't submitted your question as of yet, please do so in the question widget, which is on your screen, and we'll be doing our best to get the answers to your questions. So now we have had a few questions that have been coming in, and the first question that I would like to ask comes from one of our online community members, and they're asking if there are any resources available for employers or coworkers to help them prepare for the return of one of their coworkers who has finished cancer treatment and is going to be coming back to work. They want to make sure that they're welcoming and that they can do whatever they can to help the coworker who is returning.
So one of the things, whenever I ask this question, I think the best place to start is to ask the person who's coming back to work. I probably welcome them and say, it's great to see you back, and say, I really want to be there for support for you. How can I be support? Because I've seen, I've seen some cancer survivors don't want to talk about their cancer, and some people get upset when people don't ask. So the best place you can do is to say, I'm glad you're back. How can I be there for you? And in terms of online resources, these are the types of things that we actually hope to address on our website. There isn't much out there at this point, but these will be the types of things that is the intent of the website, to guide employers on things like this, as well as colleagues, about how to help a cancer survivor return.
Okay, perfect. So we can keep an eye then on the site for those resources as well. Okay. Now, another viewer of our webcast today has mentioned that they are currently off of work due to cancer, and that their insurance provider is paying part of their wages on a long-term disability. And they have been told that when they return to work, that their employer can give them any job that they feel that they're able to fulfill, and they're not really sure what to expect, and they're wondering what they could expect when they go back, if it could be any job or if there are some sort of restrictions.
So that very much is contingent on their work situation, and it may fall under duty to accommodate. But again, back to the undue hardship question is the employer obligated to return to the former job? So my advice on any legal question related to that is, if you're feeling concerned about that, is to talk to a lawyer. And we're actually going to list on the website fairly quickly, because we realize questions like this are going to come up, of nonprofit organizations, human resource organizations, that you can sort of give them a shout and say, can you tell me about the situation? Because I think it requires a higher level of expertise to differentiate what is the employer allowed to do versus, is this a demotion, that type of thing.
Okay. Now, when someone is looking for a new job after a cancer experience, one of our viewers asks if they're legally required to disclose cancer history.
So my understanding is they're legally required to disclose limitations and need for accommodation, how it may impact the work, but not necessarily cancer history. In many cases, it's not the cancer that's disabling you from work, it's often the effects of the cancer, or the effects of treatment for that matter. So
are they legally obliged to disclose prior to accepting the job position, or they can disclose their limitations following accepting the job?
And that bear me, Christine, again?
So as part of the question, if somebody's looking for work, if they're legally required to disclose a cancer diagnosis. So at this point, the answer we know is no. But if they have limitation because of their cancer, some late effects of the cancer treatment or their cancer experience, can they just disclose those limitations following being hired in that new position?
Well, and that's where I think you go back to, it's helpful to kind of sort of think this through, and I think the Work Inc. article that was on that slide is very helpful in terms of thinking about timing. I understand in terms of talking to a lawyer that, maybe time of the job after that you could disclose about the need for a limitation and the need for accommodation, allow you to do the job. But I think there are things to consider in terms of how the employer is going to feel. Mm-hmm. And so we are actually having a vocational rehab counselor that will be specifically writing an article on disclosing at certain times of the interview. There are pros and cons. Like, mm-hmm. A lot of times, one of the concerns is if you work in a small job field and everybody knows about it anyway, is that the elephant room? Do you need to address it? But then that gets back to if you think that's something that's going to be a barrier to you versus, are you obligated? No, but if you feel that might be something that people are going to worry about discriminate against you, you may want to think around how you're going to handle that. Of note, it's important to realize employers are not allowed to discriminate you based on disability. Mm-hmm. So, so that's something else to consider. Although sometimes it's very difficult in a job interview if you disclose that you've had a disability, that you've been discriminated. So those are things to think through. And ultimately, if you're concerned, back to the same advice, if you're really concerned that that's the type of thing that's bubble up, again, call your local human rights organization to kind of talk that through.
But also to think about it positively, let's say if the limitation is that you have decreased vision, so you can do the job, but you'll need some accommodations, such as a larger screen, could be one of the accommodations. This is something that can easily be discussed even during the job interview, or you may select to say it afterwards. But again, it all depends how that's going to be worked out and how the employer will feel.
So I think it's ultimately you want to talk it through, talk to your human rights organization, think about the pros and cons of that. I'd hate to tell you anything to do and find out you're the best read of your environment. And so for me to give you blatant advice and say, go ahead and do it, you know the work field better than I would. So I think it's do your research and figure out how you're going to approach it and read the information that we're providing and get the right sort of information so you can make an informed decision how to best disclose. So I hate the fact that we're not sort of directly answering the question. I know that's hard, but I really don't. There's a real variance in terms of, some environments, this would work here and not the other. And I think this is where you have to really take into your own situation.
Okay. And another question that we have received from one of our viewers today is they're expressing their concerns about the possibility of being treated differently once they do return to work. How would you recommend that somebody maybe could handle being put in that situation?
So I think, the first part of differently, what does that mean for somebody? And I think, I've certainly come across people that they don't want people to pity them, for example, or they're worried about discrimination. So I think again it's sorting out, how are you feeling about being treated differently? But you certainly could also coach the environment. Like I've had patients that have said they don't want to talk about their cancer. And they say, thanks for asking. I really appreciate you showing your interest in checking with me. Do you mind if we can put it behind me? You can guide the environment and say, I don't want to be treated any differently. I just want to get back to work, and it's really great to see you again. And see, the advantage of saying that is it's not shutting the person down. It's it's sandwiching again. You're kind of acknowledging that you're happy to be there, happy that they've inquired about you, but kind of telling you that you want to be treated the same. So you're the best coach in that situation. And sometimes you can't help people being treated you differently. If it's discrimination, if it's those are the types of things that you may have to have a conversation with your employer, because that's actually the duty of the employer is to prevent a discrimination in the workplace.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, another one of our online community members has asked if you've found that many people are choosing new careers due to their cancer experience or environmental stresses that may have even contributed to their cancer.
I certainly see a lot of people that say that they don't want to go back into a stressful work environment, for example. And I think there are various lines of intervention with stress at work. So absolutely, changing your jobs is one option. But the problem with changing jobs in many cases is you may lose your job, your wages. You may have to sort of try all over again. You might lose your, getting a new job, it might be harder to get benefits. You may not have the same workplace that you know. So there are costs to doing that, and that's something you want to weigh very carefully. So, other lines of intervention is also looking at, can you tweak the things in the job to make it better? And the other things is to look at, can you improve your resiliency around stress? Can you be learning stress management techniques so that you're able to handle it a lot better and ultimately have a better quality of life? And also, if you're experiencing stress at work, can you do anything to soothe yourself in the stress? So that's where things like relaxation and meditation, even learning communication and assertiveness and negotiation skills, those are all those things that help you kind of manage the stress level a little better. I think as an example of somebody I know is every 2 years she says the job's too stressful and quits. And then every 2 years later, the same thing's happening. And the problem is, as that person's getting older, there are less and less job offers. So there can be some consequences of jumping ship, and I would say, look at all these options so you can give yourself some choices. But ultimately, there are a lot of people that go through a cancer experience, and they say, I don't want to go back to my job, and certainly I work with them in providing career exploration, and that's It's, as a career counselor, a vocational counselor, it's very rewarding because I often find cancer patients, people, survivors, often are really motivated to create a better for their life, and they do. They do look for other things, and sometimes that can be the new beginning for people. Definitely that can happen, and that's okay.
Okay. And
I'll note, you'll be interested related to the website. We've just had a voc rehab counselor from Gia Strong to write a section on career exploration. So it'll be there, including websites in terms of web links and things like that people can do to help them look at alternative jobs.
Okay, fantastic. Now, another one of our viewers today has sent forward a question, and they ask, what happens if their insurance company or employer are suggesting a graduated return to work, but they personally feel that it would be better to wait and maybe try to mirror their workday until they feel that they're ready to return full-time?
Well, as often one of the most common types of job accommodations out there, and this actually is a graduated return to work. But if you're feeling you're not ready, again, it gets back to having a conversation actually with your physician about why you're not feeling ready, what needs to be done. It's not terribly unusual. It's not always realistic to expect you to be 100%. There is a rehabilitative quality about going back slowly. Because even if you do a work simulation, nothing beats about going back on a graduated basis because it gives you, it brings your work conditioning up slowly. And that if you feel it's going too fast, these are the times to go back to your physician. And this is where the more systematic you can be in terms of documenting the challenges. Like if you go to work and you're absolutely not able to feed yourself when you go home, and you're looking after yourself, that's the type of thing to be telling a physician because that may mean that the graduated return to work may need to slow down. But ultimately, to some degree, the buck stops with what the physician's recommending. But what you may get with an insurance provider is they may have their own physicians providing this medical opinion. So again, you need to look at the core of why you feel that you can't handle return to work at this time. Is it psychological? Is it cognitive? Are there assessments? And it may require further assessments to really assess that this is really true, that you're not able to return to work, or assessments and recommendations about what you can do to improve your function.
Now, someone who may have had a very advanced cancer and are facing a return to work, one of our viewers has shared that they were diagnosed with advanced stage and they're currently going through treatments, but they're having a hard time going back to a stressful workplace.
So again, this is an example of, part of this is having an informed discussion with your physician about the challenges of return to work, and even deciding with your physician, is work the right thing to do? Are you ready? And I think part of the picture with this is if you're advanced cancer and if your condition is getting worse, part of this factor is the workplace able to accommodate you, how supportive they are. These are all the things to sort of consider. I'm certainly seeing more and more patients that are survivors, I should say, that have palliative diagnoses and that want to return to work. And certainly we try to help them help them kind of, if we could do that, help them do that. It's not terribly unusual. But, part of the picture is you also have to look at what is the impact for you. So, in terms of, are you going to be able to handle? Is this going to be difficult? Is this, is your workplace able to sort of support you with this? So these are very thoughtful conversations to be having with your healthcare provider, because really the physician's the person is going to be guiding, clearing you to return to work and that type of thing.
Okay. Now, another one of our viewers has asked that, or sorry, not asked, they've shared that their long-term disability benefits are running out next month, but currently they're facing that their employer doesn't actually have a job for them to do. So does the employer have an obligation to provide a job to them prior to their disability benefits running out?
Well, I think this is why when we're back we say these are things you want to look at sooner rather than later, because sometimes this can happen. I think this, again, falls under the duty to accommodate, but absolutely the more notice you can give to your employer to kind of get ready for you to return to work, the less likely this is going to happen. And I do see people fall on a shortfall where the employer is not ready for them to have a job. But again, this might be a conversation, like if you feel there could be a job that's made available. I've certainly I was working with one survivor recently where she was concerned that the employer was kind of delaying things. So these are conversations to have with human rights, because this has fallen to duty to accommodate. But I've certainly, again, seen people where they're ready to come back and the job's not there for them at that point. And that's why, a big focus in terms of these early conversation is preventative. Rather than getting to the end of your claim and having a kind of a difficult, a lot of anxiety and fear that you're not going to have continued sort of financial support, is to kind of see this sooner rather than later and give, for example, your employer lots of warning that you're planning to come back and at what time, ideally. So I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sure that's hugely stressful. I've certainly have other patients felt the same way. It's a hard one, and to seek out to advice for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, some of our viewers have also asked, what are their options if they end up finding that they actually may have returned to work too soon?
So again, back to sort of, again, the physician is probably the person that an insurance provider and employer is going to in terms of assessing your fitness to return to work, and that's the type of thing you want to do. Is you want to keep the physician in the feedback loop, because it may require, there's a number of things. It may require looking at accommodations to allow you to work at the workplace, or it may require delaying a graduated return to work, sort of stepping back a bit. So these are important things to sort of communicate and to keep the physician in the loop. Because they odds are the person that can kind of say, no, we need to slow down or step back a bit. But you may find, just on an added note, again back to, an insurance physician, for example, if you have insurance, may think you're ready, and that might, sometimes certainly they may not necessarily agree with a family doctor. It may require a specialist assessment in order to guide that. Sometimes at some point there might be disagreements about sort of general practitioners, and it may, so if the barrier is psychological, you might be looking at a psychiatry assessment. If it's cognitive, looking at a specialist in terms of that area, neuropsychology. If it's physical, kind of looking at a specialist there.
Okay, thank you. Now it looks like we have time for one more question. So I'd like to ask another question that one of our viewers has sent to us today. And that is that their job is very stressful, and they also find there's a lot of negativity in their workplace. And they share that they feel that they won't be motivated to go back after their cancer. So is this something they should bring up to the insurance company?
I think it's more likely, probably not. I wouldn't. I think that's more kind of searching for your own motivation. Is something for you to be working on. Absolutely, one of the barriers and things that help people go back to work, but mostly is people can change their priorities. We sort of see that. I certainly see that in my experience working with with cancer survivors, and also it's certainly showing up in the research. So, sometimes it isn't always, you may not be motivated to go back to job. So, what I encourage survivors to do if they have to go back to the workplace, what can they do to engage in a way that they can be motivated? And again, I always think in examples. I remember once seeing somebody who was laid off, was concerned about being laid off, and she said, well, why should I feel motivated about my job? And I said, well, do it for yourself. So if you're trying to motivate yourself to do your job 100% for yourself, not for the employer's benefit, for your colleagues, it's for you. And the advantage of that is you feel it's mindfulness, you're doing the job well done, you're doing it for yourself. It's also, it doesn't hurt for when you're looking for a new job to basically say, I showed up and I was 100%. Because the challenge is when you're unmotivated to go back to the job, and if you do the job less than 100%, you might be at risk of losing your job, like if you're not performing. And it's also just hard. It's very hard to do if you're a job that you're not motivated. And I'd also say related to that is if you absolutely think that that's going to be a challenge for you, like I've often recommended, how can you tap into motivation? So sometimes it's picking aspects, looking at parts of the job that can fulfill you. So some people, even if they go back to a job they hate, they decide they're going to create a company team to do a run for, a Canadian Cancer Society run, things like that to help yourself engage. And then ultimately, you could go back to your job, but it doesn't prevent you from looking for others if you're sort of feeling. And so certainly that happens for people. Some people say, I just don't feel the same way about the job, I don't love it. But sadly, you're caught in a rock and a hard place. You may find that financially, you need to go back. And that, your finances, your benefits might be, if you have benefits, you're lucky enough to have benefits because some people don't. You have no choice financially to go back. So it's kind of working through that.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, this is all the time that we have today for our questions. But before we do end the webcast, Maureen and Christine, I wanted to give you a few minutes just to give some parting words to our audience and wrap up today's discussion.
Well, we're certainly hoping that you have gained some tips on how can you self-assess your readiness to work, and also getting some helpful tips about what sort of accommodation could be available, and also resources to support cancer survivors and healthcare providers and employers and insurance providers, and all helping out together to make a successful return to work for cancer survivors. And we strongly encourage you and hope that you will visit the website when it comes live towards the end of March of this year.
Well, and again, it's back to sort of the point, like looking at kind of return to work, if that's your hope, kind of looking at maintaining the supports of the workplace to help it become easier, looking at it sooner than later. So, and that even includes if you absolutely hate the job, look at that sooner rather than later, so you can shift gears and not have to be forced to kind of go where you don't want to go.
Okay, well,
and thank
you.
Thanks for letting us talk.
Yes, thank you for joining us. I'm so glad.
We're hoping it's helpful. I know I find, it's so hard question and answer. Often when I see patients, I see them in an hour at a time, and we kind of work through it together, and that's part of a dialogue. So I always sort of find it's very awkward to answer these questions one-off, because there's so much to the answers here. So I do hope that these answers are helpful, but I also realize everybody's situation is unique and individual and complex. I hope there's some helpful tips in there. I hope the Return to Work booklet and our websites help you. But, it'd be nice to see everybody individually and answer these questions, but it's unfortunate. But this is hopefully the next best thing.
That's right, yes. And thank you so much for your time today, Maureen and Christine. And I am sure that our audience did find it as informative as I did. And thank you, too, to our audience today for your participation in the webcast. As a reminder, if you know someone who you think might benefit from the webcast tonight, but maybe wasn't able to join us, an on-demand version will be available on CancerConnection.ca. And if there are any questions that you didn't have answered, we will aspire to get them back to you in the coming days, or you can always visit us on our online community. Of course, too, you can call the Cancer Information Service at the phone number listed on your screen, and I'm sure that we'll all be sure to keep our eyes to the website cancerandwork.ca as well in the coming months. So until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Our next webcast will be held in March, and it will be on nutrition and cancer. So please keep an eye on CancerConnection.ca for more information. So thank you again for joining us for this webcast, Returning to Work After Cancer.